At Christmas dinner, my dad announced, "We're selling the family business. You're getting nothing." My siblings smirked. I asked, "Who's the buyer?" He grinned. "Cardinal Logistics." I smiled back. "Dad, I am Cardinal Logistics." The room went silent. Then I dropped the real bomb. The Henderson family Christmas dinners used to be loud, full of laughter, banter, and the scent of glazed ham and fresh-baked rolls. But this year, there was a heavy weight in the air. Tension buzzed quietly under every polite smile and forced Merry Christmas. It was as if everyone knew something was about to happen, but no one dared to say it. We were in the same old dining room in rural North Carolina, the house my father built with the first big paycheck he earned from Henderson Freight. The walls still held family portraits from decades ago. Kids with missing teeth, mom with her soft smile, and dad, always with his hand on someone's shoulder like a quiet claim of ownership. I hadn't been home in 2 years. The last time I saw my father, he told me I was a disappointment, that I didn't understand real work, or what it meant to build something from the ground up. I walked out of that office, his office, knowing I wouldn't come back unless I had something worth showing. And tonight I did. But no one knew that yet. Emily sat at the far end of the table, sipping wine like it was a performance. She'd always been the golden child, organized, driven, the favorite. Her blonde curls were perfect, and her voice just slightly louder than it needed to be when she spoke to Connor about her recent promotion. Connor laughed a little too hard. He was the youngest, still trying to prove he was more than just a party boy turned regional manager at the family business. My seat was next to Mom, who tried, desperately, to pretend everything was normal. She kept passing bowls, asking if I wanted more potatoes, if I was still living in Chicago, if the weather there was still awful this time of year. I answered with short nods, trying not to get lost in the nostalgia of being home and the undercurrent of resentment that clung to everything. Then came Dad. Robert Henderson sat at the head of the table like he always did, shoulders square, expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken much during dinner, which was unusual for him. Normally, he'd be lecturing us about responsibility, legacy, or how we needed to think like builders, not passengers. Tonight, though, he was too quiet, and that silence made the roast beef taste like cardboard. I could tell something was coming. It was in the way he glanced at Emily, then Connor, then me, the way he reached for his water glass, took a sip, and set it down just a little too deliberately. And then he cleared his throat. Everyone stopped. Forks froze. Glasses paused midair. Even the dog lying beneath the table lifted its head. Dad leaned back in his chair. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, voice steady, almost rehearsed. "Family is the most important thing in life, and I know this hasn't been an easy year." That was an understatement. "But," he continued, "there's something we need to discuss, something that affects all of us." My stomach tightened. "I sold the company." Silence. He let the words settle like dust. "The paperwork was signed this morning. Henderson Freight is no longer ours." Emily's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Connor stared at Dad like he'd misheard. "But," Dad said, louder now, "I want to make something very clear. There's no inheritance, no shares, no trust fund. The deal was clean. You're getting nothing." That word, nothing, hung in the air like a slap. Emily blinked. Connor's mouth twitched into a confused half-smile, like maybe this was some weird Christmas joke. Then Emily smirked. That knowing, satisfied smirk that only someone who already knew could wear. Connor looked at her. "You knew?" She didn't answer. I leaned forward. "Who's the buyer?" Dad's eyes finally met mine, full of triumph. "Cardinal Logistics." He said it like a victory. I placed my fork gently on the table. Then I looked at him and smiled. "Dad," I said quietly, "I am Cardinal Logistics." Everything stopped. Emily's glass slipped from her fingers, crashing to the floor. Connor muttered something under his breath. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. But Dad didn't move. He stared at me, trying to process what he'd just heard. I reached into my blazer, pulled out a business card, and placed it face up on the table. Jacob Henderson, CEO, Cardinal Holdings. The room went absolutely silent. And then I dropped the real bomb. The room felt smaller now. The warmth from the fireplace in the corner did nothing to soften the growing chill that wrapped around the table like a vice. Dad's eyes didn't leave mine, but behind them, something was shifting. His confidence had cracked, ever so slightly, like a spiderweb creeping across a windshield. Still, he refused to blink. Emily was the first to recover. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as a smirk tugged at the edge of her lips. "That's rich," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You? CEO of a major logistics firm?" "Sure, Jake." Connor chuckled, not because he found it funny, but because he didn't know what else to do. "You've been gone for 2 years, and now you're suddenly the mysterious billionaire buyer? Come on." I didn't respond to them. I didn't need to. My eyes were still locked with Dad's, and I could see the calculation happening behind his glare. He wasn't doubting what I'd said. He was trying to figure out how I'd done it, how he hadn't seen it coming, how I, the one he'd practically erased from the family business, had just bought it out from under him. He finally leaned forward. "You're bluffing." I gestured toward the card on the table. "Call the number. Ask for executive verification." He didn't move. Emily reached the card but stopped herself halfway, as if touching it would validate the truth in a way she wasn't ready for. Connor was already pulling out his phone, likely Googling Cardinal Holdings CEO. His fingers froze mid-scroll. His eyes widened. He looked up. Jesus Christ, he's telling the truth. Emily grabbed the phone from his hand, scanned the screen, and went pale. "What the hell?" Dad pushed back his chair, the legs screeching against the hardwood floor. He stood, fists clenched. "You think this makes you a man, Jacob? Buying your way back into this family." "I'm not trying to come back into anything," I said, calmly. "I never left. You just stopped seeing me." He turned away from the table, pacing slowly toward the sideboard where Mom had laid out dessert. He wasn't interested in pie. He was just buying time, processing. My mother looked at me with a blend of pride and horror. "Jake, why didn't you tell us? Would it have mattered?" I asked gently. "Would any of you have believed me?" She didn't answer. Her silence said everything. Dad finally turned around. "So what? You sneak around by my company under a false name, and now what? You expect a medal? Applause?" "No," I said, standing slowly. "I expect transparency. You told us we were getting nothing, so I made sure you were right." Emily slammed her hand on the table. "You're a traitor, Jake. You went behind the family's back. This is betrayal." "No," I said. "What you all did to me years ago was betrayal. I left with nothing. No support, no shares, not even respect. And I built everything on my own. You told me I was worthless. I believed it until I didn't anymore." Connor stood now, too, glaring at me. "You bought the company just to get back at us?" I laughed once, bitter and sharp. "You think this is about revenge? If I wanted revenge, I'd have dismantled the company, sold it off in pieces, fired everyone." Dad narrowed his eyes. "And what did you do instead?" "I kept it intact," I said, "because the people who work there deserve better than you. You treated them like tools, like numbers on a spreadsheet. I remember how you ran operations, Dad. I remember the yelling, the threats, the punishments disguised as policy." His jaw tightened. "I remember how you pushed me out," I continued, "because I questioned your way of doing things, because I suggested we innovate, digitize, adapt. You called it weakness. I called it progress." Connor snorted. "You mean all that Silicon Valley nonsense?" "No," I replied. "I mean building something that lasts. Not just a business, but a legacy, one that doesn't destroy people in the process." Emily looked at me, arms still crossed. "You think you're better than us?" "No," I said, stepping closer to the head of the table. "I know I am." The words hung in the air like gunfire. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Dad walked slowly back to his seat and sat down heavily. For the first time, he looked smaller, not just older, but defeated in a way I had never seen before. He shook his head. "So that's it? You own everything now." I own controlling interest. I confirmed. The deal is already filed with the state. You signed the final documents this morning. The ink isn't even dry. Emily laughed bitterly. So what happens now? You fire us? Kick us out? I met her eyes. You'll see soon enough. Connor leaned over the table. You think the board will just let this slide? I tilted my head. You mean the board I appointed 6 months ago? The one Dad unknowingly gave proxy to when he restructured the voting rights last quarter? Yeah, I think they'll let it slide. That landed like a punch. Emily blinked fast. Connor looked at Dad, whose face was drained of color. You used a fake buyer, Dad muttered. An alias. That's fraud. No, I said calmly. It's corporate strategy. Every legal channel was followed. You didn't do your due diligence. You were so eager to sell, so confident no one could outplay you, that you walked right into the deal. Emily reached for her wine again, but her hand trembled. Why now, Jake? Why at Christmas? I turned to her, and for the first time that evening, my voice softened. Because I wanted you all to see my face. When you realized everything you thought you had is gone. Connor stared at me, his voice low. You've changed. No, I said. You just never bothered to know who I really was. My father stood again, but this time with more weight in his posture. He was a man realizing, perhaps for the first time in decades, that he was no longer the smartest person in the room. And he hated it. He pointed a finger at me. You may own the company, Jacob, but you'll never be me. I smiled. That's the point. And with that, I stepped away from the table, leaving behind the broken pieces of family dinner that had never truly been about family. My shoes echoed down the hallway as I made my way toward the study. There were still things to discuss, still cards to play, and I hadn't even touched the biggest one yet. The door to the study creaked as I pushed it open, stepping into the only room in the house that hadn't changed since I left. My father's books still lined the shelves in neat rows, titles on leadership, logistics, and American industry, none of which he had probably opened in years. His desk stood at the center like a monument to everything he built, meticulously clean, a globe perched at one corner, a family photo at the other. I walked to the desk and placed a small envelope on the blotter. Inside was a full copy of the acquisition contract, including the fine print that no one in that dining room had read. But they would. Behind me, I heard the footsteps. Dad came in first, his pace slower than usual. The confidence that carried him through decades of board meetings, union strikes, and economic downturns had eroded. Emily followed, her heels clicking with a new urgency. Connor dragged behind them, uncharacteristically silent. Mom didn't come. I sat in the leather chair behind the desk, not out of habit, but out of symbolism. It had always been his seat, his domain. But tonight, it was mine. Dad stood across from me, arms crossed, eyes sharp. You want to finish this? Let's finish it. I leaned back, calm. Glad you came. Connor walked around the room, glancing at the books, the plaques on the wall. He stopped at a photo of the original Henderson freight truck from the 80s and stared at it like it was some lost relic. Emily remained standing, arms tight across her chest. We know it's real now. The deal, the documents. Connor showed us everything. And I asked, and we want to know what the hell you're planning. She snapped. You've already humiliated us in front of Mom, in front of each other. What's next, Jake? You're gonna fire us all. I gestured to the envelope on the desk. It's all in there. Dad stepped forward, snatching it and pulling out the pages. He skimmed quickly, eyes scanning for something, anything that might give him leverage. Then he stopped, brows furrowed. This clause, he muttered. Executive transition period, 90 days, subject to termination without cause or compensation. I nodded. Standard clause in private acquisitions, especially when there's risk to company culture. Connor looked confused. Wait, what does that mean? It means, I said, as of 90 days from today, none of you have guaranteed positions at Henderson Freight. And technically, I could let you all go tomorrow if I wanted. Emily's face turned red. You bastard. Dad raised a hand toward her, signaling silence, but his grip on the paper tightened. You included this in the beginning? It was always part of the contract, I said, but hidden behind the shell company. You didn't bother to read past the payout figures, did you? Connor scoffed. So that's it? You oust the founder and the family, just like that? No, I said. This isn't about ousting anyone. It's about ending a toxic legacy. Emily rolled her eyes. Spare us the startup martyrdom speech. You think this is a game, I replied, voice level. You don't understand what this company became under Dad's control. I do. I saw it firsthand. I worked in that warehouse. I drove those trucks. I sat through the screaming matches and budget meetings and the layoffs you two celebrated because it balanced the sheets. Dad slammed the folder onto the desk. You think you're some kind of savior? No, I said, but I am the one in charge now, and it starts here. He took a step forward, voice lower. You really believe you can run this company better than me? I already have, I said. Cardinal wasn't built by accident. It's running smoother, with happier employees, better retention, and higher margins than Henderson Freight ever had under your leadership. Connor shook his head. This is insane. You can't just come back after years and burn everything down. I'm not burning anything. I replied, I'm rebuilding. Emily paced now, clearly shaken. What do you want, Jake? Revenge? Validation? An apology? I stood, walking slowly around the desk toward them. I want none of that. I want to fix what you broke, starting with how this company treats its people, and that includes removing anyone who stands in the way. Dad's nostrils flared. You mean me? You especially, I said. There was a pause. Heavy, quiet. Then Connor asked more softly, what if we want to stay? I turned to him, studying his face. For the first time, there was something like sincerity there. Doubt, maybe even guilt. That depends, I said. Are you willing to start from scratch? No title, no perks, just a job. Earn your way up like everyone else. Emily scoffed. You've lost your mind. But Connor didn't answer right away. He looked at Dad, then back at me. I'd think about it. Emily stared at him. You can't be serious. He shrugged. Jake's not wrong. We got comfortable, maybe too comfortable. Dad's voice cut through. You'd kneel to him? Your own brother? Connor's voice was steady. I'd rather work than watch everything crumble. That landed hard. Emily took a deep breath. What about Mom? I glanced toward the door. She's not part of the company. She'll be fine. She always has been. Dad narrowed his eyes. You're making a mistake, Jacob. This power trip, it won't last. I stepped back to the desk, picked up the folder and held it out. Then fight me, legally, publicly. But you signed this, Robert. You handed it over. All of it. To me? He didn't take the folder. Emily shook her head. Unbelievable. You wanted nothing to do with me. I said, voice rising just slightly. You made that clear when you shut every door. And now you want to act shocked that I found a way in through the back. Dad was quiet again. He looked around the study, this shrine to his empire, and realized it didn't belong to him anymore. I sat down once more, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, and pulled out a sealed letter. What's that? Emily asked. I looked at them all. The beginning of the next chapter. And I placed it on the desk. No one moved. No one spoke. But I knew the silence wouldn't last. Not with what was coming next. For a moment, none of them reached for the letter I had left on the desk. The weight of it hung heavier than the envelope itself, and that silence gave me the opening I needed. I leaned back in the chair, watching their faces carefully. My father's hands were clenched tight behind his back. Emily was pacing like a caged animal, and Connor's eyes never left me. He was waiting for me to break the silence. Instead, I let it stretch until the discomfort became unbearable. Then I spoke. You think tonight was about shocking you, about humiliating you in front of each other. It wasn't. Tonight was simply the final page of the story I started writing years ago. Emily scoffed, though her voice shook with unease. Spare us the melodrama. I ignored her and kept my eyes on my father. Do you remember the night I left? You told me I wasn't cut out for leadership. You told me I had no vision. that I couldn't handle the business you built from nothing. You thought you were breaking me down, so I would crawl back one day and beg for forgiveness. I leaned forward, my voice lower now. But what you actually did was light a fire that never went out. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Connor shifted on his feet, and I could see curiosity flickering there. He wanted to know more, though pride kept him quiet. I left with nothing. I continued. No connections, no money, no credibility. Chicago was brutal. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment with broken heating. Worked late nights at a shipping warehouse just to pay rent, and ate canned soup for dinner more times than I can count. But every night when I couldn't sleep, I studied. I taught myself the parts of the industry you never bothered to adapt to: digital logistics, route optimization, fleet automation, things you dismiss as fads. Emily rolled her eyes. You're making yourself sound like some self-made hero. I shot her a look sharp enough to silence her. You wouldn't understand because you've never built anything without Dad's shadow standing over you. You've never had to. I turned back to my father. After a year, I landed an analyst job at a mid-sized firm. They didn't hire me for my resume. They hired me because I wouldn't stop knocking on their door. I worked harder than anyone there. When others clocked out, I stayed in the office, digging into shipment patterns, negotiating small contracts, making myself indispensable. Within 3 years, I had risen higher than anyone expected. And by the 5th year, I was ready to leave and start something of my own. Connor's brow furrowed. That was the beginning of Cardinal? I nodded. Not as you know it today. At first, it was just me and a laptop, convincing 2 skeptical investors to believe in an idea. I promised them I could move freight faster, cheaper, and with fewer delays than the big players. I had nothing to offer except my word and the hunger to prove myself. But that was enough to get them to write the first checks. From there, I built a small team. Young people, hungry people, people who were sick of working for companies that treated them like numbers. And we started winning contracts. Emily finally stopped pacing. So you built this empire just out of spite? I shook my head. Not spite. Necessity. I had to prove to myself that I wasn't what Dad said I was. Every step, every contract, every sleepless night was me building something real. By the time Cardinal had expanded into 3 states, people started paying attention. Investors who once ignored me were suddenly calling my office. And with every deal, I remembered the warehouse workers at Henderson Freight who whispered about hating their jobs, about being afraid of Dad's temper, about losing their pensions when times got tough. I promised myself I'd build a company where they'd want to work instead. My father's silence was louder than Emily's protests. He stared at me with the kind of look he used to reserve for competitors, analyzing, dissecting, measuring. Over time, I went on, Cardinal wasn't just another company. It became a threat to the old way of doing things. We won clients you thought were locked down for life. We expanded routes faster than Henderson Freight could keep up. You didn't even know it was me cutting into your margins. That was the point. I wanted to watch you feel the pressure of competition without ever realizing who was behind it. Emily's face tightened. That's sick. No, I said firmly. That's strategy. You treated me like I was weak for leaving. You treated me like I didn't matter. So I made myself the one player you couldn't ignore. Connor spoke up, hesitant. So when did you know? When did you decide you'd take Henderson Freight for yourself? I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. The first time I signed a client you once told me was impossible to land. That's when I realized I didn't just want to compete with you. I wanted to dismantle the empire you used to hold over us. And I wanted to do it in a way that left you powerless to stop me. Emily pointed at the letter on the desk. That's what's in there, isn't it? Some dramatic finale you've been cooking up? I didn't answer her. Instead, I looked straight at my father. I've been preparing this moment for years. Every acquisition, every hire, every deal was a step toward tonight. And the reason I waited until now, Christmas, is because I wanted you to see that the son you dismissed, the one you told would never amount to anything, is the man who now holds your legacy in his hands. For the first time since dinner, my father's face shifted into something I couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was recognition. The look of a man who finally understood the depth of what he had underestimated. "I don't care what you built," he said at last, his voice gravelly. "You'll never carry the Henderson name the way I did." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's exactly the difference between us. I don't need the Henderson name. I made one of my own. The words echoed in the study. Emily swallowed hard. Connor ran a hand over his face, still processing. My father lowered himself slowly into the chair opposite mine, as though bracing for the impact of what else I had yet to reveal, because they thought the truth ended with the sale. They had no idea it was only the beginning. The envelope still sat between us, untouched, like a loaded weapon on the desk. Emily's eyes flicked to it again and again, curiosity battling with her pride. Connor shifted in the leather chair against the wall, restless. My father sat unnervingly still, his gaze locked on me, his mind no doubt pulling at threads, searching for a way to unravel what I had so carefully woven. "You said you planned this for years," Emily finally said, breaking the silence. "But how? How did you pull this off without anyone finding out?" Dad has eyes everywhere in this industry. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, because I wanted him to have eyes everywhere, on everything except me. Connor frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I opened the folder beside me and slid a document across the desk. The name at the top wasn't mine. "You've probably never heard of Grayson Pierce. That's because he doesn't exist." Emily narrowed her eyes, scanning the paper. "A fake identity?" "Not fake," I corrected. "Fabricated. Registered with every state record that mattered. Built credit, paid taxes, signed leases. Grayson Pierce lived and breathed on paper. Enough to satisfy any background check. He was the face behind the acquisition front. The man who met with Dad's legal team. The one who signed the letters of intent. He was everything I needed him to be, without ever having to show my own face." Connor's jaw dropped. "You're telling me Dad shook hands with Ghost?" I smiled faintly, more than once. Emily slammed the paper down. "That's illegal." "No," I countered, calm and precise. Every document was filed through legitimate channels. I had lawyers build the framework. Grayson Pierce wasn't a forgery. He was a corporate identity, a legal construct, everything tied back to Cardinal Holdings through layers of subsidiaries. Shell companies with real addresses, real employees, real transactions. There was nothing fraudulent about it, just invisible. Dad finally spoke, his voice low but sharp. "You played a shell game." I turned my eyes to him. "No, I built a maze, and you walked right into it." Emily shook her head, still not convinced. "You expect us to believe you went through all of that just to outsmart Dad? That's insane." "It wasn't just about him," I said. "It was about control. If anyone had known Cardinal Holdings was mine, the deal would have collapsed before it started. Every competitor, every analyst, every whisper in the market would have traced it back to me. Henderson Freight would have blocked me, fought me in court, poisoned negotiations. But Grayson Pierce? He was untouchable. He was the man no one saw coming." Connor whistled low, almost impressed. "So all this time, you were moving the pieces without anyone realizing?" "Yes," I said simply. "While you were sitting at this very table, debating bonuses and promotions, I was building something no one here had the imagination to conceive. And the beauty of it." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. Dad never suspected, because the idea that I could beat him was impossible in his mind. He underestimated me so completely. He never even looked over his shoulder. Dad's glare sharpened. "You think deception makes you clever? You think smoke and mirrors make you stronger than me?" I met his anger with steady calm. "No, Dad, I think foresight does." Emily ran a hand through her hair, restless. "So what now? You played your big trick. You strutted in here like some mastermind. What's the end game? Because if you think employees are just going to rally around you out of loyalty, you're delusional." I let the silence answer for a moment. Then I pulled another paper from the folder. This time, an employee satisfaction survey report. I slid it across the desk. These were Henderson Freight's numbers under Dad's leadership. Turnover rate higher than industry average. Morale at rock bottom. Anonymous complaints about abusive supervisors and unrealistic quotas. Workers begging for basic protections and getting nothing in return. Connor leaned in to read, eyebrows knitting together. Emily didn't move closer. My father didn't so much as blink. I reached into the folder again, producing another sheet. Now, here are Cardinals' numbers. Retention up by 30%. Incident reports down by half. Overtime reduced because we automated where it made sense. Drivers reporting less fatigue. Fewer accidents. And profits. I tapped the bottom line. Up every single quarter. For the first time, Connor looked at me differently. Not like a rival, but like someone he wasn't sure if he should fear or follow. Emily remained stone-faced, unwilling to give me that ground. Dad's silence was heavier now, but I could see the way his grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. You manipulated this entire family. Emily spat. No, I said, rising from my seat. I exposed it. You grew complacent, blinded by comfort and tradition. I built something from nothing while you laughed at me. I earned my seat at this table. Then I built a bigger table and bought the room. Connor spoke quietly. You're not finished yet, are you? I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out an old framed photo of all of us, years ago, smiling on the porch of the first warehouse Dad had ever bought. I studied it for a moment before answering. No, Connor, I'm just getting started. I set the photo back in its place, turned, and looked them each in the eye. Because everything I've revealed tonight, it's only half the story. Emily frowned. Half. I nodded slowly. There's something else none of you know. Something that makes tonight look small in comparison. My father's voice was like gravel. What have you done, Jacob? I let the question hang in the air. Then I tapped the sealed letter still lying on the desk. The answer is in here. And when I open it, none of you will see this company, or me, the same way again. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Emily's breathing quickened. Connor's eyes darted between me and the envelope, and Dad's face hardened into a mask I couldn't quite read. I didn't open it yet. Not tonight. Not yet, because the Real bomb was still waiting. The letter on the desk felt like a fuse waiting to be lit, but I didn't touch it yet. Timing was everything, and tonight wasn't about detonating all at once. It was about making them feel every shift of the ground beneath their feet. I could see my father fighting to control his breathing, his jaw locked so tight the veins in his neck strained against the skin. Emily, on the other hand, was coiled energy, ready to lash out again, and Connor looked as though he'd aged years in the span of an hour. I tapped the contract still spread out before them. The part you never noticed, I said, is right there, Section 12, subsection C. Connor leaned forward, scanning the lines quickly. His lips moved as he read. Then his eyes widened. Wait, this says. I cut him off. It says that executive staff is subject to a 90-day transition review. That means none of you are guaranteed positions past the first quarter. In fact, it means I can terminate you without cause, without severance, and without appeal. Emily snatched the page from his hands, her eyes darting across the lines. No, this has to be misinterpreted. Dad would never sign this. I looked at her evenly. He did. This morning. Her face flushed with anger as she turned toward my father. How could you let this happen? How could you not see this? He didn't answer. For the first time, Robert Henderson, the man who never hesitated to command a room, seemed unsure of his footing. Connor whispered, almost to himself, So we're disposable? Not disposable. I corrected. Accountable. If you think you can prove your worth in 90 days, then maybe you'll have a place in the new Henderson Freight. If not, you walk away with nothing but memories. Emily slammed the paper down. This is a setup. You wanted to humiliate us. You tricked Dad into signing this so you could get us all at once. No, I said firmly. I didn't trick anyone. The clause was in plain sight. If you had taken even a moment to look past the dollar signs, you would have seen it. But you didn't, because none of you ever imagined you could lose. My father finally spoke, his voice low, but every word ground out like gravel. You're going to fire your own family. I met his eyes without flinching. You fired me the day you pushed me out. Don't act like this is new. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway outside, every second amplifying the tension in the room. Emily's voice cracked as she spoke again. So that's it? You just cut us loose? All of us? I turned toward her. You have 90 days to show me why you deserve to stay. But make no mistake, family doesn't buy you protection anymore. From now on, merit is the only currency. Connor shook his head, almost laughing in disbelief. You think this is a meritocracy? Jake, you're playing with fire. These are people's lives. Our lives. That's exactly why it has to change. I snapped back because under Dad's rule, people's lives meant nothing. I worked those shifts, Connor. I saw the fear in the driver's eyes when routes were overloaded, when safety protocols were ignored to shave off costs. I watched managers scream at warehouse staff until they broke down. And you stood by it, both of you. You called it efficiency. I call it abuse. My father's fist clenched on the desk. I built this company from nothing. Blood, sweat, years you'll never understand. And you think you can waltz in with your software and your soft rules and undo what it took me decades to achieve. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so he had to strain to hear it. You didn't build a company, Dad. You built a prison. And now I hold the keys. Emily inhaled sharply, her anger shifting into something closer to fear. Connor avoided my eyes, staring at the floor. For the first time, the power dynamic in the room had completely reversed. You have no idea what you're unleashing, Dad said, his voice shaking with restrained fury. On the contrary, I replied, I know exactly what I'm unleashing. Freedom, accountability, and a culture where people want to work, not where they're forced to stay out of fear. Emily tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. You talk like some savior, but you're just another tyrant with a different mask. I turned to her, calm and steady. The difference between me and Dad is simple. He built everything to keep power for himself. I built Cardinal to share it with people who earned it, and I'll do the same here. Connor finally raised his eyes to me. So, what do you want us to do? I considered him carefully. His tone was different, less combative, more curious. You start small. You work like everyone else. No executive privileges. No Henderson surname opening doors for you. You'll earn your place, or you won't have one at all. Emily barked a bitter laugh. You actually think Connor's going to shovel freight for you? Or that I'll sit in some cubicle filing paperwork? You're out of your mind. But Connor didn't laugh. He didn't look at her, either. His eyes stayed on me, conflicted but thoughtful. My father slammed the folder shut. This ends now. You may have the papers. You may have the signatures. But you'll never have this family's loyalty. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I'm not asking for loyalty, Dad. I'm demanding accountability. You can fight me if you want. But in 90 days, your era is over. He stood, shoulders broad but weighed down with something heavier than pride. You think you've won, but you don't understand what you've started. I let him leave without stopping him. Emily followed, muttering curses under her breath, her heels striking the floor like gunfire. Connor lingered, his eyes meeting mine for a long, uncertain moment before he finally turned and walked out as well. The study was quiet again, just me and the faint hum of the heating vent. I picked up the sealed letter from the desk, holding in my hand. It felt heavier than paper should. That letter wasn't just about the 90-day clause. It held the next move, the one none of them were ready for. And when I revealed it, there would be no going back. The house was quiet after they left the study, but silence in that place was never peace. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first shots, the kind that promised the war had only just begun. I sat there alone for a while, the sealed letter still resting in my hand, before tucking it into my jacket pocket. It wasn't time yet. Timing was everything, and I knew when to move and when to wait. I stepped out into the hallway. The smell of pine needles from the Christmas tree lingered faintly in the air, mixing with the sweet trace of cinnamon from the kitchen. Somewhere deeper in the house, I could hear my mother moving dishes, probably trying to clean up the fragments of a dinner that had turned into a reckoning. Connor was in the living room, slouched on the sofa, staring at the glow of the fireplace without saying a word. Emily wasn't there. Her absence told me she had retreated somewhere to regroup, maybe call someone, maybe to pour another glass of wine and pretend she wasn't shaken. Dad had gone upstairs, his heavy footsteps echoing like thunder earlier, a man retreating to his stronghold after losing his first battle. I sat across from Connor. For a while, neither of us spoke. The fire cracked and popped, filling the silence between us. "You really built it all yourself?" he finally asked, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. I studied him carefully. He wasn't asking out of disbelief anymore. He wanted to understand. "Yes," I said. "Every connection, every deal, every brick. No shortcuts, no Henderson name to lean on. Just work. More work than I thought I was capable of." He looked into the fire. "But how? It doesn't make sense. People don't just climb that fast. There had to be something." There it was, the opening. The question he didn't realize he was ready to hear the answer to. "It wasn't luck," I said, "and it wasn't just strategy. It was people." He turned his head toward me, confusion in his eyes. "When I left here," I continued, "I didn't have resources, but I had conversations. I listened to the warehouse workers, the truckers, the dispatchers, people Dad never listened to. I paid attention when it talked about broken systems, dangerous routes, ways things could be improved. They thought no one cared about their ideas. But I did. And when I built Cardinal, I built it around them." Connor frowned. "Employees don't run companies. Executives do." "That's what you've always believed," I said. "That's what Dad drilled into us. That leadership is about control. But the truth is, the best leaders don't just command. They listen. They take the wisdom of the people who are in the trenches every day and use it to build something bigger. That's the secret, Connor. I didn't just build a company. I built loyalty." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. A few swipes later, I handed it to him. On the screen was a video of one of Cardinal's quarterly gatherings. Drivers cheering, warehouse staff applauding, executives on stage not to take credit, but to hand out recognition to their teams. Connor stared at it, his face unreadable. "You see them?" I asked. "They don't just work for Cardinal. They believe in it, because I believed in them first." He handed the phone back, still silent. I studied him for a long moment before leaning closer. "You've never had that, not with Henderson Freight. You've had obedience, maybe even fear, but never loyalty. And that's why Dad is losing. That's why you're all losing." Connor rubbed his face with both hands. "So what? You're saying you turned the workers into your army?" I shook my head. "Not an army. A family. One I chose. One that chose me back." The word family seemed to sting him. He looked away, back at the fire. I decided to press further. "Do you want to know why investors lined up behind me when they could have backed a dozen other companies?" He hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "Because they saw something they don't usually see in this industry. A company with a soul. Everyone can talk about profits, margins, efficiency. But when I walked into those meetings, I brought data that showed happy employees meant safer operations, better customer retention, and, yes, higher profits. Investors don't care about sentiment. They care about returns. And I proved to them that treating people better makes you money. That's the part Dad never understood." Connor leaned back against the sofa, exhaling slowly. His eyes flicked toward me again, softer now. "So you really don't need us?" "No," I admitted. "I don't. But that doesn't mean I don't want something from you." He sat up straighter. "What's that supposed to mean?" I stood and walked toward the fireplace, staring into the flames as I spoke. "You're not like Emily. You've always been a follower. You go with whoever's stronger. And I think you're starting to realize strength doesn't look like what you thought it did." I turned to face him. "You could be part of this, Connor, if you're willing to start from zero. Not as a Henderson, as a man, as someone willing to work." He didn't answer right away. His silence wasn't resistance this time, it was thought. That was enough for me. I left him there and walked toward the kitchen. My mother was there, stacking plates by the sink, her eyes red, but her movement steady. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "Why, Jake?" Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. I stepped closer, because it had to be done. She shook her head, finally turning to face me. You could have just built your company and left us alone. You didn't need to come back here. Not like this. Not on Christmas. I swallowed hard. If I didn't come back, you'd never understand. You'd keep believing Dad's version of me. The son who failed, who walked away. I needed you to see who I really am. Her eyes searched mine, and for a brief moment, I thought she might understand. But then she whispered, "You're not the boy I raised." I didn't flinch. No, I'm not. I couldn't afford to be. I left her in the kitchen, her quiet sobs echoing as I walked away. The house felt heavier than ever. Upstairs, I heard footsteps. Emily's voice sharp on the phone, probably already scheming her next move. Dad's door was shut tight, the sound of drawers slamming as though he was hunting for a weapon. Though in his case, the weapon would be paperwork, old contacts, desperate leverage. And Connor was still by the fire, staring into flames that looked far too much like the crossroads inside him. I stepped back into the study, closed the door behind me, and pulled the sealed letter from my pocket once more. The claws had shaken them, but the truth I carried in that envelope, that was the kind of truth that would shatter everything. And tomorrow, they'd find out. By the time we all gathered back at the table, the food was cold. No one was hungry anymore, but Mom insisted we sit together anyway. She placed fresh candles on the table, as if light could erase the cracks that opened hours before. Her hand shook slightly as she set the plates again, but she didn't speak of it. She didn't have to. The silence around us was suffocating. Connor sat one end, staring at his folded hands. He looked younger than usual, stripped of his usual bravado. Emily sat stiff-backed, wine glass in hand, though she hadn't taken a sip in several minutes. Her eyes were sharp, darting between me and Dad like she was waiting for one of us to strike again. And Dad, Robert Henderson, sat at the head just as always, but there was no command left in his presence. He looked like a man carrying bricks on his chest, every breath forced. I sat opposite him, and for the first time in my life, the balance of power at that table had shifted completely. Mom tried to smile, her voice trembling. It's Christmas. Maybe we can just be grateful to be together. For once, no one answered her. Emily broke first, her tone sharp as glass. You didn't just come here to flaunt your little empire, did you, Jake? You planned this. Every word, every move. You wanted to dismantle us in the one place where Dad always ruled, this table. I didn't flinch. This table was never about family. It was about control. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every Sunday dinner, it wasn't about being together. It was about Dad reminding us who held the power. Tonight, I took that away. Dad's jaw flexed, but he didn't interrupt. Emily leaned forward. You're proud of yourself then? Breaking your own family apart. I met her stare. You can't break what was never whole. You just refuse to see the cracks. Connor shifted uncomfortably, finally speaking. Maybe he's right. Maybe we've been pretending too long. Emily turned on him, furious. Don't you dare take a side. I'm not taking anyone's side, Connor said quietly. I'm just saying he's not wrong. Dad's voice cut through like a blade. Connor, just his name, spoken with the authority that once froze us in place as kids. But Connor didn't back down this time. He looked at me, then at Dad, and shook his head slowly. Mom tried again, her tone desperate. This doesn't have to be war. Robert, please. Jake, please. It's Christmas. For once, can't you all let it rest? But there was no rest to be had. Not now. I leaned back in my chair, speaking clearly so none of them could pretend they didn't hear. I didn't buy Henderson Freight to destroy it, or to destroy you. I bought it because someone had to save it from what it was becoming. And if that means cutting out the rot at the top, then yes. That starts with all of you. Emily slammed her glass down, liquid sloshing over the rim. You're disgusting. You talk about saving people while stabbing your own blood in the back. No, I said coldly. I'm saving people from my blood. Her face flushed red, but before she could snap again, Dad finally moved. He leaned forward, hands gripping the table, his voice low and steady. You can sit there and tell yourself this is justice, Jacob. You can dress it up with speeches about workers and loyalty and progress. But at the end of the day, you wanted one thing: revenge. You wanted to hurt me. I looked him straight in the eye. No, I wanted to show you I could win without you, and that I didn't need your approval to do it. His glare didn't waver, but I could see it. The tiniest flicker of something he'd never allow himself to admit. Fear. Connor exhaled slowly, breaking the silence. So what happens to us now? 90 days and then what? Do you just cut us loose and pretend we never existed? I turned to him. That depends on what you do in those 90 days. I told you already, you can stay if you're willing to work for it, but not as Hendersons, as employees. Earn it like everyone else. Emily scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. I'd rather burn the place down than take orders from you. I didn't look at her. That's your choice. Mom's hand shot across the table, her voice breaking. Stop it, please. I can't sit here and listen to this anymore. You're tearing each other apart in front of me, in front of everything I try to hold together. I softened my tone when I looked at her. Mom, I'm not trying to hurt you. I never wanted this to land on your shoulders. But you spent years holding together something that was already broken. You can't fix it by pretending anymore. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away. The silence that followed was the heaviest of the night. Emily wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. Connor leaned back, his face shadowed in firelight, torn between fear and a strange new clarity. Dad stared at me like he was trying to burn holes through my skin. Finally, I stood. My chair scraped against the hardwood, the sound like a signal that the supper was truly over. I came here tonight to tell you the truth. Henderson Freight is mine. The old rules are gone. What happens next is up to you. I looked at Emily, then Connor, then finally my father. But understand this, whether you fight me or join me, the company will change, and nothing you do will stop it. I turned to leave the dining room, my steps deliberate, the air heavy behind me. But before I crossed the threshold, Dad's voice reached me, sharp and cold. You'll regret this, Jacob. I stopped, but didn't turn around. Maybe, but not as much as you'll regret underestimating me. And then I walked out, leaving them behind at the table where power had shifted forever. In the quiet of the hallway, I pulled the sealed letter from my jacket again, weighing it in my hand. Its time hadn't come yet, but soon they would see, because the family's supper might have ended. But the real battle had only just begun. The night dragged on after I left the table. The house no longer felt like the home of my childhood. Every corner seemed to hum with unspoken words. Every shadow was heavier than it should have been. I stepped outside onto the porch, breathing in the cold North Carolina air, sharp enough to clear my head. The stars above were sharp pinpricks of light, the kind I used to stare at as a boy when I wondered if life had more to offer than this town and my father's company. I wasn't outside long before the door creaked open behind me. Connor stepped out, shoving his hands into his pockets. He hovered a few feet away, unsure whether to sit or keep his distance. Finally, he sank onto the porch step, his shoulders hunched. You didn't just do this to prove a point, did you? He asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. My breath clouded in the air as I exhaled. No, not just to prove a point. He looked at me then, waiting. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to hate me, the way Emily did, the way Dad did. But something in him needed answers. I didn't buy Henderson Freight to get revenge, I said slowly. I bought it because I couldn't stand watching what it had become. You don't see it the way I do. You've been sheltered from the worst of it, but I've been in the warehouses. I've sat with the drivers on overnight routes. I've listened to dispatchers breaking down because they were told to cut corners they knew would cost someone their life. Dad's empire wasn't just flawed, it was rotting from the inside out. Connor frowned. You're exaggerating. No, I said firmly. You just never bothered to look past the polished numbers Dad fed you. You never saw the way employees dreaded walking into work. You never saw the quiet desperation in their eyes when they realized the company would never protect them. I saw it. I lived it. He rubbed the back of his neck, staring at the yard. So what? You think you're some savior swooping in to fix everything. I shook my head. Not a savior. Just someone who refuses to ignore it any longer. When I left, I told myself I'd never look back. But the truth is, I couldn't forget the people who still worked there. They were like family in a way you never were. They deserved better than Dad. Better than all of us. So when opportunity came, I didn't just buy the company to own it. I bought it to rebuild it. He didn't reply right away. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the crunch of gravel as the wind shifted across the driveway. Finally, he asked, "And what about us? Where do we fit into your little mission?" I met his eyes. "That's up to you." Emily made her choice already. She'd rather cling to the scraps of power she thought she had than admit the truth. Dad will never bend. He's too tied to the idea of control to let it go. But you, I studied him carefully. You're different. You could still choose a side. He let out a dry laugh. Some choice. Be loyal to Dad and watch the company collapse under its own weight. Or follow you and start at the bottom like some rookie. That's what loyalty is supposed to mean, I said. Not blind devotion to a name, but commitment to a cause that matters. He leaned back on his hands, staring at the stars. For a while, he didn't say anything, but I could tell he was thinking, truly thinking, maybe for the first time in his life. The door opened again and Mom stepped out, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her eyes moved between us, red-rimmed from tears. She spoke softly, but there was steel in her tone. "You've made your point, Jacob. You've shown us you can win. But why couldn't you leave it at that? Why did you have to tear down your father in the process?" I turned toward her, because it wasn't enough to win for myself. The company had to change. "Mom, you don't see what he's done because you were always kept apart from it. But the men and women under him, they saw. They felt it every day. And I couldn't just sit by and let it continue." She shook her head. "You think you're fixing things, but all I see is a family being ripped apart." Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit, but I forced myself to hold her gaze. "Sometimes, Mom, things have to break before they can be rebuilt." Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing more. She turned and went back inside, leaving Connor and me on the porch. He looked at me again, his expression conflicted. "If what you're saying is true, if you really bought the company to change it, then what happens next?" I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. "Next, I start cutting out the pieces that poisoned it. That means new leadership, new policies, new culture. And yes, it means Dad steps aside. Permanently." Connor nodded slowly, though he still looked uneasy. "He's not going to take that lightly." "I don't expect him to," I said. "But this isn't his choice anymore." We sat in silence again, the firelight from inside flickering through the window. For the first time, Connor didn't look like my enemy. He looked like someone standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything for him. When I finally stood, I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Think about it, Connor. Think about who you want to be, because the clock's already ticking." I went back inside, leaving him to his thoughts. The house was quiet again, but I could feel the storm brewing upstairs where Dad was no doubt plotting his next move. And in my jacket pocket, the sealed letter pressed against my chest, waiting. The real reason I had come back wasn't just to claim victory or even to start change. The real reason was written in that letter. And when it was opened, the war for Henderson Freight would no longer just be about family. It would become something much bigger. The morning after Christmas came with an icy stillness. The house felt like a battlefield after the war drums had stopped. No shouting, no clashing words, just a heavy silence of people who knew change was no longer something distant, but immediate. I woke early, earlier than I had in years in this house, and walked down the long hallway to the study. The smell of old leather and wood polish greeted me as I stepped inside. I sat at the desk, not as a visitor, but as the rightful occupant. For decades, that desk had symbolized power that belonged to one man. But not anymore. By the time the rest of the family stirred, I had already sent out the official memos. The board had been notified, and the legal documents filed. Henderson Freight's leadership structure was changing, effective immediately. Dad came down last. He entered the study without knocking, his presence filling the room the way it always had. Except this time, he wasn't the one in control. His eyes landed on the pile of documents I had laid out across the desk, and his jaw tightened. "What have you done?" His voice was low, dangerous. I leaned back in the chair, hands clasped calmly. What should have been done years ago? Emily appeared in the doorway, arms folded, face pale but tense. Connor lingered behind her, avoiding Dad's eyes, as if he already knew what was about to unfold. I slid a document across the desk. "As of this morning, you are no longer CEO of Henderson Freight. Your termination papers are signed and filed. You've been officially removed from all decision-making authority." For a moment, he didn't move. The silence in the room was like a held breath. Then he stepped forward, snatched the papers, and scanned them quickly. His face darkened with every line he read. "This is my company," he growled. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I didn't just walk in," I interrupted sharply. "I planned. I built. I outmaneuvered you. The papers are legal. The signature's valid. You handed over the keys yourself. And now it's done." Emily's voice cracked with outrage. "You're destroying him. He built everything we have." "No," I said firmly. "He built what served him. He built a company where people lived in fear, where loyalty was exploited, where progress was smothered under pride. And I won't let that legacy choke it any longer." Connor finally spoke, his tone quiet. "Dad, it's real. The documents are airtight. We checked." Dad whipped his head toward him, his face twisted with betrayal. "You knew." Connor shook his head quickly. "I didn't know until last night, but I've seen the paperwork. There's nothing you can do." Dad's fist slammed onto the desk, rattling the globe that sat on its corner. "This isn't over. You think you can erase me from my own empire? I'll fight you in court. I'll rally the shareholders. I'll tear Cardinal apart piece by piece if I have to." I leaned forward, my voice steady, deliberate. "You'll lose. The board has already voted. And the shareholders? They'll follow whoever keeps the profits flowing. And right now, that's me. You can fight, but every move you make will only prove to them that you've lost your grip. You're finished, Dad." The words seemed to hang in the air, too heavy to move. Emily's breathing quickened, her anger giving way to panic. Connor shifted uncomfortably, torn between loyalty and resignation. And my father, once the unshakable force at the center of this family, looked, for the first time, like a man stripped of his armor. He sank into the chair across from me, the same one he'd used to intimidate countless executives and employees over the years. But now it was just a chair, and he was just a man staring at the ruins of his control. "You're my son," he muttered. "How could you do this to me?" I didn't blink. "You taught me business isn't about blood. It's about power, control, leverage. I learned that lesson better than you ever expected, and now I'm using it." Emily's voice rose again, desperate. "You can't expect him to just walk away. He'll fight you until his last breath." "That's his choice," I said, "but the outcome won't change." Connor leaned against the doorway, his voice hesitant. "So what happens now?" I stood, straightening the papers on the desk with deliberate precision. "Now, the company moves forward. Employees will see the change immediately. Safer policies, fairer treatment, accountability at every level. Henderson Freight becomes something worth being proud of, not because of fear, but because of respect." Dad's eyes narrowed. "And me?" I met his gaze coldly. "You're done. Permanently." His face twisted, his fists clenching at his sides. For a moment, I thought he might lunge across the desk, the way Connor almost had the night before. But then something in him broke. His shoulders sagged, and he looked away. Emily's anger cracked into disbelief. "You can't do this. He's Robert Henderson. Without him, none of this exists." "That's exactly the point," I said. "It can't exist if it depends on one man's shadow. It has to outlive him. Outlive us all." The clock in the hall chimed the hour, the sound echoing through the house like a verdict. Dad rose slowly from the chair, his movement stiff, his face carved in stone. "This isn't the end, Jacob. You may have won this round, but you'll never truly take this company from me. Henderson Freight is me. I stepped out from behind the desk, standing eye to eye with him. No, it was you. Now it's mine. He stared at me for a long, searing moment, then turned and walked out of the study. His footsteps echoed through the hall, each one heavier than the last, until the door slammed upstairs. Emily followed him, muttering under her breath, her heels sharp against the wood floor. Connor lingered, watching me, conflicted but no longer fighting. The study was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This time it wasn't stalemate. It was victory. And as I stood in a room that had once been his kingdom, I realized something profound. Removing Robert Henderson wasn't just the end of an era. It was the beginning of everything that came next. The house felt eerily hollow after my father retreated upstairs. His absence was louder than his presence had ever been, and the walls seemed to carry the weight of everything unsaid. Emily had gone after him, her voice muffled and sharp through the closed doors above. Mom stayed in the kitchen, clinging to her rituals of order, scrubbing dishes that were already clean. And Connor lingered in the living room, torn between a man he had been raised to follow and the brother who had just dismantled everything in one decisive stroke. I knew the battle for control was won, but the war inside the family had only begun. That was why I returned to the study later that evening, carrying the sealed letter I had held on to all night. The fire in the hearth was nearly burned out, casting long shadows across the wood-paneled walls. I sat behind the desk once more, the letter heavy in my hands, and waited. It didn't take long. Connor stepped into the room first, his face lined with hesitation. "You're not finished, are you?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "Not yet." Emily stormed in behind him, her face tight with anger. "What now, Jake? Haven't you destroyed enough? You've taken the company, you've humiliated Dad, and you've turned this family into a circus. What else is there?" I placed the letter flat on the desk. "The truth," she scoffed. "More theatrics?" Before I could answer, Mom entered, drying her hands on a dish towel. She looked tired, but her eyes carried a determination I hadn't seen before. "If there's more to be said, Jacob, then say it. But understand, there may be no coming back from it." I nodded once, then slid the envelope open. The paper inside wasn't long, but its contents carried the weight of years of planning. I read aloud, my voice steady. This letter outlines the redistribution of Henderson Freight's new ownership shares. Effective immediately, the company is not only under Cardinal's control, it is structured so that 20% of all future profits will be allocated into an employee trust. This trust will grant long-term staff equity stakes, retirement protection, and voting rights on internal policies. Emily's eyes widened. "You're joking," I continued, ignoring her. Additionally, the new board includes 2 seats reserved for representatives elected by the workforce, ensuring employees have a voice in executive decisions. Connor blinked, struggling to process. "Wait, you're giving the workers ownership?" "Yes," I said, "because they're the backbone of the company, because they've been ignored for too long, and because they're the only reason Henderson Freight, or Cardinal, for that matter, has ever succeeded." Emily exploded. "You can't be serious. You're handing away our inheritance to a bunch of drivers and warehouse clerks? Do you know how insane that sounds?" I met her fury calmly. "It's not insanity. It's justice. And it's the future of business. Companies that empower their employees thrive. Companies that bleed them dry collapse. Dad never understood that. But I do. And I won't repeat his mistakes." Connor leaned against a bookshelf, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he muttered, "That's actually brilliant." Emily whipped around to glare at him. "Don't you dare say that." He shrugged, but there was a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "Think about it, Em. If the employees own part of the company, they'll fight for it. They'll stay. They'll work harder. Jake's right. It's not charity. It's strategy." Emily's voice shook with rage. "You've completely lost your mind, both of you. Dad built this empire for us, not for strangers. And now you're just giving it away." "No," I corrected. "I'm building something bigger than us. Something that will outlast us. Henderson Freight won't be a family heirloom anymore. It will be a legacy shared by everyone who gave their sweat to make it what it is. Mom's eyes softened, though her hand still gripped the towel tightly. Jacob, is this why you came back? Not just to prove yourself, but to do this? I nodded. Yes, this was the plan from the start. To end the cycle of one man holding the reins while everyone else suffers. To give the company back to the people who deserve it most. The room fell silent. Emily was seething, pacing like she was ready to shatter the nearest glass. Connor looked thoughtful, almost relieved. And Mom finally looked at me not as a stranger, but as her son again, though her expression was heavy with sorrow for the family that had been fractured in the process. Then, suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the stairs. Heavy, deliberate. Dad appeared in the doorway, his face carved in fury. I knew you had an angle, he said. His voice was cold, controlled, but I could hear the storm beneath it. You didn't buy this company to run it. You bought it to tear it apart. No, I said firmly. I bought it to rebuild it. He stepped into the room, his presence filling it with the same force it always had, though now it was tinted with desperation. You're giving my company to the employees? To nobodies? That's theft, Jacob. You're robbing your own family. I stood, meeting him eye to eye. Theft is what you did to them for decades, squeezing every ounce of loyalty without ever giving anything back. This isn't theft. This is restitution. Emily rushed to his side, her voice shrill. Dad, you can't let him do this. Stop him. But Dad didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on mine. You think you're righteous. You think you're some visionary. But you're just a child playing with matches, about to burn down everything I built. I held his gaze. Maybe it needs a burn, so something better can grow from the ashes. For the first time, my father's composure cracked. His voice rose, louder than I'd ever heard it. You'll regret this, Jacob. You'll regret the day you thought you could take my life's work and give to strangers. The words echoed through the house, shaking the very walls. But I didn't back down. This was never just your life's work, Dad. I said, my voice steady as steel. It belonged to every man and woman who broke their backs for you while you sat on your throne. And now it finally belongs to them. The silence that followed was absolute. Emily's face was pale. Connor looked stunned, and Mom closed her eyes as though praying. The twist had been revealed. The company wasn't just mine, it was theirs. And nothing my father could do would change that. January arrived with a chill that seemed to echo the state of my family, cold, brittle, and fractured. But while the Henderson home had fallen silent after that Christmas night, Henderson Freight was anything but quiet. The first week of the year marked the official transition of power, and with it came a storm of changes that rippled through every department, from the boardroom to the warehouses. On my first official day as CEO, I stood in front of the workforce assembled at the company's largest distribution center. It was the same building where I had once worked nights unloading trucks, sweating through 12-hour shifts, invisible to the executives who made decisions without ever stepping foot on the floor. Now I stood on the small stage with the Cardinal Holdings banner behind me, the Henderson Freight logo soon to be rebranded. The room was filled with drivers in worn jackets, warehouse staff in steel-toed boots, clerks clutching clipboards. Their faces were wary, cautious, unsure what the future held. They knew Robert Henderson was gone. They knew his son had bought the company. But they didn't know me, not really. I took a deep breath and began. I know many of you don't trust what's happening. You've given years, some of you decades, to this company, and you watched leadership make promises that were never kept. You've seen decisions that value profits over people. I know, because I was one of you once. I worked these floors. I hauled the freight. I felt the same fear of speaking up, knowing it would fall on deaf ears. There was a stir in the crowd. A few heads lifted, curiosity breaking through the skepticism. But starting today, I continued, things change. Not because I'm in charge, but because we are. Henderson Freight will no longer belong to one man or one family. It will belong to everyone who makes it run. 20% of profits will be invested into an employee trust. Your trust. You'll have ownership. You'll have a voice. And you'll have the security you deserve. Murmurs spread across the room. Some looked shocked. Others whispered to each other. Disbelief etched on their faces. A man in the front row, a veteran driver with silver hair and callous hands, raised his voice. "Is this for real, or is this just another speech?" I looked him straight in the eye. "It's real. The paperwork is already filed. The trust is already funded. This isn't a promise. It's a fact." The room fell quiet again, but this time, the silence wasn't skepticism. It was a kind of silence that comes before something shifts. I went on. "In addition, 2 seats on the board will be reserved for employee-elected representatives. That means your voices won't just be heard. They'll be part of the decision-making process at the highest level. We'll build a culture where safety is prioritized, where innovation is welcomed, and where loyalty is rewarded with respect, not fear." Slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. First a few claps, hesitant, then more, until the sound grew into a steady wave. Some faces still looked doubtful, but for the first time in years, there was hope. After the meeting ended, employees crowded around me, asking questions, sharing concerns, even shaking my hand. Many thanked me, some with tears in their eyes. I listened to every one of them, reminding myself that this was why I had done it, not to crush my family, but to give these people a future. Back at headquarters, the transition wasn't as warm. The upper management, many of them Dad's loyalists, were stunned by the new direction. Some resigned immediately, unwilling to work under me. Others stayed, curious to see if the promises I made would hold. I welcomed the resignations. It cleared the way for fresh leadership, people who believed in the vision rather than clinging to the past. Connor surprised me when he walked into my office a week later. He looked different, less polished, less arrogant. His suit was replaced by a plain button-down, sleeves rolled up. He didn't sit when I gestured toward the chair. He stood, hands in his pockets, and spoke plainly. "You said I'd have to start from the bottom," he said. "Fine, put me in operations. I want to learn how this place actually works." I studied him carefully, searching for traces of sarcasm or pride. But his expression was steady, earnest in a way I'd never seen before. "Operations is grueling," I said. "Long hours. You'll answer to people who used to work under you." He nodded. "Then I guess I'll learn humility." A part of me wanted to doubt him, but another part, the part that remembered him staring into the fire on Christmas night, believed him. "Fine," I said. "Report to the distribution center Monday morning. You'll shadow the shift supervisors." He gave a small nod, not of gratitude, but of acknowledgement, and then he left. Emily, however, never returned. She sent a terse email days after Christmas, declaring she had no interest in working for me, that she would find her own path. I wasn't surprised. She had always been Dad's mirror, proud, unyielding, unwilling to bend even when it meant breaking. As for Dad, he vanished into silence. He didn't return to the office, didn't call, didn't fight the decision publicly. But I knew better than to assume he was gone for good. Robert Henderson was a man who thrived on power, and power doesn't disappear quietly. He was regrouping, waiting for a chance to strike back. Despite that looming shadow, the company was already transforming. Policies were rewritten, safety standards tightened, communication channels were opened, inviting feedback directly from workers. I visited sites personally, not as a figurehead, but as a leader among them. I shook hands with drivers, inspected warehouses, rode along on delivery routes. Word spread quickly. This wasn't the Henderson Freight they remembered. At night, when I finally returned to the empty apartment I had rented near headquarters, I thought about everything that had happened. My family was fractured beyond repair. My father hated me. My sister despised me, and my brother was walking a tightrope between past and future. Mom was caught in the middle, torn between love and sorrow. And me, I was finally where I had always dreamed of being. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. One evening, I stood by the window of my office, looking out at the fleet of trucks lined up in the yard below. Their engines were quiet, but I knew tomorrow they'd roar to life, carrying not just cargo, but the weight of every promise I had made. For the first time, Henderson Freight wasn't just a family business. It was a shared future. And as much as I had lost to get here, I knew I wouldn't trade it. This was the beginning of a new cycle. Spring came slowly to North Carolina, and with it, the company that once bore only my father's shadow began to take on a new identity. By March, the Henderson Freight name had been fully integrated into Cardinal Logistics. The trucks still rolled down highways across the Southeast, but now they bore a logo that symbolized not just efficiency, but transformation. Employees no longer whispered about layoffs in the break rooms. They spoke openly about new opportunities, fairer schedules, and, most importantly, being heard. But outside the walls of the company, whispers of my family's collapse spread like wildfire. Local papers ran stories with headlines that blended drama and business. Sunhouse father in Christmas coup. Henderson dynasty ends in betrayal. National outlets picked up the story weeks later, intrigued by the combination of scandal and corporate reinvention. I ignored most of it, but I knew it was eating away at my father. For a man whose pride had always been tied to public image, silence in the headlines would have been kinder than the narrative of his downfall. In April, I received an invitation from a major business magazine to sit for an interview. Their interest wasn't just in the takeover, but in what they called a radical restructuring of an old-world company. I accepted, not for the spotlight, but because it was time to control the story before others twisted it further. The interview was held in my office. The journalist was sharp, asking direct questions that cut through surface-level answers. "Jacob, most people would have assumed you'd run from your family name after what happened. Why buy back into it?" I leaned back, considering my words carefully, because walking away would have been easy. But there were people, hundreds of them, who couldn't walk away. They didn't have the luxury. I saw the damage being done to them, and I knew I could either let it continue or do something about it. So I did. She nodded, scribbling notes before glancing up again. "Your father says you betrayed him, that you destroyed the legacy he worked his entire life to build. How do you respond to that?" I didn't flinch. I didn't destroy it. I rebuilt it. His legacy was built on fear and control. Mine will be built on respect and shared success. The foundation may be the same, but the house is entirely new. The journalist leaned in slightly. "And what are you most proud of?" For a moment, I thought of the numbers, the profit margins, the investor calls, the growth charts that showed steady climb. But those weren't the truth. The truth was quieter, simpler. "I'm proud," I said slowly, "of turning pain into purpose, of taking the rejection, the disdain, the humiliation I once felt, and using it as fuel to build something better. That's the only revenge I ever wanted. Not to destroy, but to transform." The interview ended, but the weight of those words stayed with me long after the journalist left. Weeks later, the magazine issue hit stands. My face was on the cover, a headline declaring me the maverick CEO who redefined legacy. For the employees, it was validation. For investors, it was reassurance. For my family, I imagined it was a knife. I didn't hear from Emily again. Her silence was her answer, and in a way, it was a relief. Connor, on the other hand, slowly carved out a new place for himself. He worked under supervisors who once resented him, but learned quickly that he was willing to earn his keep. One evening, after finishing a late shift, he stopped by my office. "You were right," he said simply. "Starting from the bottom changes how you see everything." I nodded. "It humbles you." He smiled faintly. "It makes you respect it. I don't know where this path leads, Jake, but I want to keep walking it." It was the closest thing to reconciliation I could have hoped for. As for my father, the silence stretched. He never returned to the office. Rumor said he spent his days in the old house, brooding, clinging to what little control he still had over Emily. When I visited Mom one weekend, she admitted he rarely spoke anymore. "He sits in that study," she said softly, "like a ghost haunting himself." I didn't hate him for it. I didn't pity him either. I just accepted that his story was different from mine. On a warm evening in May, I stood outside one of the company's newest distribution centers. The Cardinal logo gleamed above the doors, and beneath it, workers filed out after their shifts, chatting, laughing, planning weekends. I listened to their voices, the easy confidence, the camaraderie that had once been impossible under Dad's rule. This was it. This was what all the pain, the years of distance, the battles it led to, not victory over my father, not headlines or magazine covers, but the sound of people who finally believed in where they worked. I thought of the boy I once was, sitting at the edge of that same dining table, invisible while my siblings smirked and my father dismissed me. I thought of how small I felt then, how worthless, and I thought of how that moment had planted the seed for everything I had become. The legacy born from disdain wasn't my father's anymore. It was mine, and it didn't belong to me alone. As I walked back to my car, the words I had spoken in that interview echoed in my mind. They weren't just a soundbite. They were the truth I had lived. The vengeance wasn't in destruction. It was in transformation. And for the first time in my life, I knew that was enough.